The Navy received reports of a giant object potentially resting on the ocean floor. Nobody knew what to expect, so everyone's mouth dropped when a massive old plane was suddenly hoisted out of the water. But that was just the beginning. When they looked inside, things got even crazier. When the Navy arrived on the scene, they did so with a large crane ship, a sea vessel they hardly ever had to use. But according to sources, this case was something special. Reports came in from a cruise ship that had passed this part of the ocean just days ago. Apparently, their onboard radar spotted a giant unknown object on the ocean floor. The calls about this object were intriguing, but before the Navy could respond, they needed some proof. Their time and, most importantly, their crane modules were expensive. They remained in storage only to be used for important missions. But when the naval commander saw the image the cruise ship radar provided, he immediately called his team and their equipment to action. After a 2-hour trip, the crew and their crane reached the detected object's location. Everyone was focused and ready as the crane's large cables were lowered into the depths of the sea, accompanied by a diving robot. Everyone on the ship was glued to the screen showing the camera footage. When the robot showed the image of a large plane on the ocean floor, gasps were heard all around. Nobody expected this outcome. Even the ship's captain was silent. The plane was massive. How did it get down there? And what could be in it? The Navy diving robot anchored the cables to secure points on the plane, and then the job was transferred to the crane module onboard the ship. The cables were retracted with a pull of the handle, and the plane started lifting upward. It wasn't an easy job. The plane was much larger than the naval crew initially anticipated, and with every inch lifted, the crane groaned and creaked. After about 30 minutes of steady tugging and mechanical groaning, the crane finally brought the aircraft to the surface. It was clear to everyone on the ship that the plane had spent many years at the bottom of the ocean, and it wasn't just the vintage design that gave away its age. The entire fuselage was corroded, with thick layers of rust obscuring any visible markings. This was a problem because they needed identification before filing reports or matching it with any missing aircraft records. We need to figure out everything we possibly can about this plane. That means there's only one thing left to do right now. The Navy captain addressed his crew. With the wings now exposed and the body mostly stable, someone needed to go inside to investigate. The wings formed a safe bridge, so he added, surveying the group, "Who's going to volunteer for this?" Curiosity was not the issue. Everyone around the captain wanted answers, but fear of what might lie inside the wreck held them back. Nobody immediately stepped forward, and tension rose in the silence. So straws had to be drawn to decide. The logic behind choosing 2 people was simple. They needed answers quickly, and 2 sets of eyes would help. However, since the plane remained suspended and unstable, safety limited them to just 2 people at a time. After a quick draw, it was decided Rick from the deck crew and Stuart Mark would be the ones to explore the interior of the wreckage. Encouraged by their shipmates above, the 2 men carefully climbed down the ship's side using a narrow iron ladder. With hearts racing and hands a little shaky, Rick and Mark dropped the final meter and landed softly but firmly on the surface of the plane's weathered metal wing. Once they landed, Rick and Mark signaled they were safe and relayed the same through their walkie-talkie. Constant communication was vital, not just to share findings, but also to ensure safety. If something went wrong, help needed to come fast. With that confirmed, the 2 men steadied themselves and walked slowly across the large metallic wing toward the main section of the mysterious airplane. The plane was missing every single window, so entry wasn't difficult. They chose the center opening for access. Rick offered Mark a boost up and then pulled himself through right after. Rows of passenger seats still remained, each one labeled with its own seat number. "This was a passenger plane," Rick stated over the walkie-talkie. Just moments later, they found something even more significant. On one of the seats, a rusted serial number could still be read, UN 970. Mark blinked and turned to Rick. "What the hell happened here?" he asked, his voice tense with confusion. Rick shrugged and carried on with the search, hopeful that something left inside might reveal crucial answers. After scouring most of the cabin without any luck, the two men turned toward the only area still unsearched, the pilot's cockpit. It was also the only section with a door. "Are you ready to pull?" Rick asked. Mark gave a firm nod. Rick had already tried opening the cockpit door using the rusted handle, but a light tug had no effect. It was completely sealed shut. The two men leaned into it together, putting all their body weight behind the effort. Pulling with force and grit, their arms strained until finally a loud metallic squeal echoed. The door began to give way. Slowly but surely, the door creaked open, revealing what lay inside. The old-school pilot's control room looked like something from a spy movie. Buttons, levers, and flickering dials covered every surface. The interior was remarkably preserved despite the wreck's age. Amid the analog equipment sat something much more intriguing, a rusted metal box. Though sealed shut from years underwater, they pried it open with effort. Inside was a sealed plastic bag, intact and protecting a recorder. Rick and Mark exchanged a look, then radioed their commanding officer about the find. The captain instructed them to open the bag. To their surprise, the plastic had perfectly preserved the recorder. With cautious optimism, they resealed the bag and prepared to bring it aboard. If the recorder's data survived, it could hold valuable information from the past. Back on the ship, the sealed bag was opened carefully and the recorder placed on the crew's central table. The captain inserted fresh batteries and pressed play. For a moment, only static crackled. Then a voice emerged. It was the pilot of the downed aircraft. He described a sudden storm they encountered on May 2, 1971, which severely damaged one engine and forced an emergency landing. The pilot and passengers survived the impact, but the aircraft was sinking fast. He instructed the passengers to use emergency rafts to head toward the nearest island visible on their navigation system. Before leaving, the pilot recorded their coordinates and sealed the device in the cockpit, hoping someone would eventually find it. As the recorder reached its end, the room fell silent. The crew understood the significance. Without debate, they entered the coordinates and redirected the ship toward the island. During the voyage, the crew exchanged theories. Some feared the passengers had perished, while others wondered if they'd survived but failed to leave a trace. A few, including Rick and Mark, clung to hope. Roughly 20 minutes into the journey, land appeared on the horizon. Excitement surged through the team as they reached the island and dropped anchor. The crew stepped onto shore, boots meeting damp sand and then firm earth. The coordinates matched perfectly. Before them stood a silent island, still and seemingly lifeless, yet unmistakably the one mentioned in the recording. Despite the stillness, they sensed a deeper story hidden beneath the surface. The crew split into teams and began searching the terrain. But the island offered no clues, no footprints, no remains of a camp, no signs of life. The eerie silence persisted. Some began to doubt the mission's purpose. Others pressed forward, determined to find answers. Though no immediate evidence surfaced, the discovery of the recorder and its message had reignited a decades-old mystery. What happened to the passengers after the landing? Did they ever make it to safety? Was this island their final resting place, or had they moved on before anyone arrived? Deeper into the jungle, the crew stumbled across a clearing. Though nature had started to reclaim it, the space looked deliberately shaped. Rick pointed to outlines in the earth resembling a small garden. The others gathered to inspect, recognizing signs of past human activity. Someone had clearly lived here. Soon, more evidence emerged. Scraps of cloth caught in branches, a cracked pot, a faint outline of a fire pit. These weren't ancient artifacts, but aged enough to confirm long-term survival. "They made it," Mark murmured, "at least for a while." As they ventured deeper, the mood shifted. The air grew dense, and an eerie silence took hold. Suddenly, shadows moved. Figures emerged from the trees, silent, alert, and watching. The crew instinctively raised their hands, trying to appear non-threatening. The people before them, varying in age but all strong and wary, said nothing. An older woman stepped forward and gestured for them to follow. With no other option, they obeyed. Through winding paths, they were led to something unexpected: a village. Well-built huts, growing gardens, and penned animals showed a thriving, self-sustained society. The island was no longer just a place of survival. It had become a home. At the village center stood a large hut. Inside sat an elderly man with white hair and sharp eyes. He looked up and smiled. "You found us," he said. "I'm the pilot. Did you find my recording?" The crew was stunned. He had waited for decades, clinging to the hope that someone would come. The pilot, now 89, shared their story. After the landing, they used life rafts to reach the island. When rescue didn't come, they stopped waiting and started building. Over the years, many of the original passengers passed away, but their children thrived, starting families and crafting a new life from the island's resources. The Navy crew offered them a way back to the modern world. The ship had enough room for everyone, but many of the younger generation hesitated. This island was the only world they had ever known. The thought of leaving it was overwhelming, even with the promise of something more. The pilot addressed them with quiet strength. "We built something strong," he said, "but the world has more to offer." His words carried weight. Slowly, the villagers began to accept the idea. One by one, they agreed. Preparations began. Farewells were emotional. This island had been everything, but the future called. Over 80 people boarded the Navy ship, some tearful, others excited, all changed forever. When they returned, the survivors were met with warmth. Medical checks confirmed their health, and the government welcomed them, providing homes in a quiet town. Though the new environment felt foreign, they adapted quickly, helped by being allowed to stay together. Under the pilot's guidance, they found their way, contributing to the community in agriculture, construction, and other familiar trades. Though life had changed drastically, they remained closely connected, bound by shared history. About a year later, the pilot passed away at the age of 90. His death was a profound loss. At his funeral, Rick, Mark, and the Navy crew were surprised by the turnout. The man who had led a forgotten people had become beloved in this new world. His legacy lived on, not just in memory, but in the resilient, unified community he had helped build. The island was behind them, but it would never be forgotten.